The room was suffocating in its silence. Only the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the low mechanical whir of the surveillance camera broke through the stillness. Tyler James Robinson sat across the steel table, shoulders slumped in an orange jumpsuit that seemed to weigh him down like chains. His wrists, cuffed tightly, rested motionless in front of him, but his eyes, dark, focused, unblinking, were locked on the empty space between himself and the detectives. The investigators had questioned hundreds of suspects before. They had heard excuses, breakdowns, even cold-blooded confessions. But nothing had prepared them for the words that slipped from Robinson's mouth that day. When asked the most damning question, why he didn't stammer, didn't hesitate, didn't even flinch, he leaned forward, his voice steady and deliberate, and delivered 3 words that cut through the room like a blade. They hired me. The atmosphere froze. It wasn't the plea of a desperate man searching for pity. It wasn't the rambling of someone unhinged. It was controlled, deliberate, like a man unburdening himself of a truth too heavy to keep hidden. And yet, once leaked to the public, those 3 words morphed into something even more chilling. Headlines didn't quote him as saying they hired me. Instead, the phrase spread like wildfire under a different name. They used me. That single shift in language twisted his statement into something darker, something viral. Clips spread across social media, commentators debated its meaning, and millions replayed his face alongside the words that seemed to hint at an invisible hand pulling the strings. In an instant, what might have been dismissed as another lone wolf act of violence became something else entirely. If Robinson spoke the truth, then a hidden force, larger, faceless, orchestrated, was behind everything. If he lied, then he had manufactured the perfect smokescreen, planting a conspiracy so explosive it could derail the investigation before a trial even began. One thing, however, was undeniable. Tyler James Robinson's story would not end in that interrogation room. On paper, Robinson looked unremarkable. 24 years old, a college student with a shaky academic history, a restless presence in online forums where his arguments flared hot and often. At home, he lived amid constant conflict. His father was a staunch supporter of conservative figures like Charlie Kirk, while Robinson had gravitated toward online circles that mocked those very beliefs. Friends thought their arguments were routine, predictable, just another father and son butting heads. But underneath the surface, a darker transformation had begun. Late nights spent on encrypted chat servers turned into hours of immersion in bitter, hostile conversations. Robinson soaked in rhetoric that burned with anger, frustration, and a thirst for action. He stopped talking to us, his father later recalled, his voice heavy with regret. He started listening to voices we couldn't see. For prosecutors, the narrative was straightforward. A young man radicalized by rage, consumed by ideology, finally snapped. But Robinson's own words, "They hired me," complicated everything. It was no longer a simple case of self-driven violence. His statement implied direction, as if someone else had pulled him into the shadows and handed him the role of weapon. The first spark of national uproar didn't ignite in a courtroom, but in a television studio. Conservative commentator Mark Levin, sitting beneath the glare of studio lights, leaned into the camera one evening and declared that he had inside information. His voice carried the weight of certainty, his tone dripping with insinuation. Robinson's words had already unsettled the investigation. Now, amplified on primetime television, they were about to set the country ablaze. The revelation came not in a courtroom, but under the hot studio lights of a primetime broadcast. Conservative commentator Mark Levin leaned into the camera, his voice sharp and deliberate, and claimed that Tyler James Robinson had not only admitted to pulling the trigger, he had gone further. Robinson, Levin alleged, had named a federal agency. The claim detonated across social media like a bomb. Within hours, clips of Levin's broadcast spread, dissected frame by frame, his words amplified and weaponized. For some, it was confirmation of their darkest suspicions that the government itself could be silencing those who spoke too loudly. For others, it was reckless speculation, an act that threatened to contaminate the investigation before a single piece of evidence was tested in court. Yet, as the nation argued, the machinery of justice began to move. Robinson's first court appearance was brief but electric. Prosecutors read the charge aloud: aggravated murder, a capital felony under Utah law. If convicted, he could face the death penalty. The weight of the words echoed across the room. but Robinson seemed untouched by them. He entered the courtroom with a restrained smirk, his body language disturbingly casual, as if this was not the most important moment of his life, but a performance staged for someone else. Reporters scribbled frantically, jurors exchanged uneasy glances, and even the bailiff, a veteran of countless hearings, appeared unsettled by Robinson's composure. Meanwhile, investigators turned their focus inward, digging through Robinson's devices, laptops, phones, encrypted drives. They weren't just searching for proof of guilt. They were chasing the question that haunted the country. Was Robinson truly a lone wolf, or was he, as he claimed, a weapon forged and used by others? But the trial was not the only battlefield. Online, the storm had already grown into a hurricane. Within days of Levin's broadcast, hashtags tied to Robinson's name trended worldwide. Students who had once joked online about Charlie Kirk found themselves doxxed, their old memes resurrected as supposed evidence of complicity. Families of those students received threats. The case had spilled far beyond the courtroom into homes, campuses, and digital spaces where paranoia reigned. Then came the second leak. A heavily redacted police report appeared online, confirming what many had speculated. During interrogation, Robinson had named people. The identities were obscured, but that didn't matter. The suggestion alone was enough to spark outrage. Online forums erupted. Threads emerged where amateur sleuths pored over travel records, timestamps, and obscure social media posts, each convinced they had cracked the code. Law enforcement urged caution. Officials begged the public to wait, to remember that Robinson's words had not yet been verified, but few listened. Each unanswered question fueled suspicion. Each day without clarity fed the belief that the truth was being buried alive. Television studios brought in their own experts. One, former FBI profiler Dr. Rebecca Haynes, delivered a chilling assessment. Robinson's calm, deliberate tone in that now infamous interrogation suggested intention, not panic. Those words were not an excuse, she told the nation. They were cybercrime units now worked around the clock, digging through encrypted chats and deleted files, hunting for any trace that Robinson's story of outside influence was real. By the end of the week, the case had transformed. What began as a tragic act of violence had become something far more menacing. Tyler James Robinson was no longer seen as just a shooter. He was either the mastermind of a carefully staged deception or the visible tip of an iceberg that stretched into the shadows of power. And then, just as the public began to demand answers, another leak surfaced. This time, it wasn't a document. It wasn't speculation. It was a second interrogation video, one that threatened to plunge the story into even darker territory. The second interrogation video was nothing like the first. Gone was the calm, collected young man who spoke in measured tones. This time, Tyler James Robinson was a storm contained within four walls. His cuffs clanged against the steel table as he slammed his hand down, the sound echoing in the room like a gunshot. His face was flushed, his body coiled with agitation. "Do you think I did this on my own?" he barked, leaning forward until his shoulders nearly touched the edge of the table. His voice cracked with fury, every syllable burning through the silence. "You think I just woke up one day and grabbed a gun? No, someone told me where he'd be. Someone told me when." The outburst was caught in sharp detail on the interrogation camera, and within hours the footage spread like wildfire. Millions watched, shared, and replayed Robinson's words. Suddenly, the question was no longer whether he had acted but who had given him access to Charlie Kirk's precise schedule. This wasn't just radicalization anymore. This was infiltration, a breach from the inside. Investigators wasted no time. Forensic teams tore into Robinson's digital life, peeling back layers of encryption like skin from bone. What they found rattled even the most seasoned analysts. Hidden folders contained manifesto-style notes, threads of ideological rage woven into carefully curated documents. But alongside them was something far more chilling, messages that read like instructions. "He'll speak tomorrow. Be prepared. They will call you a monster, but history will know." These were not ramblings of an unhinged man. They looked like guidance, encouragement from unseen hands. Then came the discovery that sent shockwaves through security agencies. In one folder, Robinson had files detailing Kirk's appearances, not just the public events listed online, but private stops never advertised, meetings known only to his staff. To security experts, the implication was unmistakable. Robinson had insider information. Either someone within Kirk's circle had betrayed him, or a connected network, had broken through the protective walls around him. The revelation ignited a second firestorm. Retired Secret Service agents and counter-terrorism specialists filled television panels, their expressions grim. "This isn't how lone wolves operate," one former agent said bluntly. "This is how coordinated networks operate." And the leaks didn't stop. Hackers began releasing what they claimed were unredacted police documents. Screenshots raced across online forums, revealing names, 3 of them allegedly tied to Robinson's interrogation statements. 2 were linked to political organizations. One was said to be a former federal contractor. The fallout was immediate and ugly. Protesters stormed state capitals, waving signs that accused shadowy figures of treason. People who happened to share last names with those mentioned in the leaks were suddenly doxxed, threatened, and forced under police protection. News outlets hesitated. Some refused to report the names, citing safety. Others hinted, letting their viewers connect the dots. A few went further, printing the names outright. The information spread regardless, unstoppable once it had entered the bloodstream of the internet. Then an investigative bombshell dropped. A major national outlet published an expo suggesting that one of the named individuals, carefully not identified, outright was tied to an active political campaign. They didn't need to say the name. The breadcrumbs were enough, and within hours, online communities had pieced it together. The allegation was staggering. If a campaign staffer had leaked security information to facilitate Robinson's attack, it wasn't just a scandal, it was a federal crime. Legal experts warned that potential charges could extend to conspiracy, aiding terrorism, and treason. Politicians scrambled for cover, issuing statements, denying involvement, and demanding full transparency. The political landscape quaked beneath the weight of the accusations. But inside the courtroom, behind closed doors, prosecutors had already moved. With deliberate precision, they introduced new digital evidence into their case, pieces of a puzzle that suggested Robinson. ES story might not just be wild conspiracy, but something rooted in cold, dangerous truth. And for the first time, the possibility hung heavy in the air. Tyler James Robinson may not have acted alone. Among the fragments buried deep in Tyler James Robinson's deleted files, investigators unearthed something chilling. Scanned handwritten notes. The scrawls looked frantic, the words etched with purpose. One line read, "Don't lose focus. This is more important than you." Another, "He is the target, not the cause." To investigators, these notes were more than disturbing, they were suggestive. They painted Robinson not as a mastermind, but as a weapon. His earlier words, "They hired me," suddenly seemed less like an excuse and more like a breadcrumb, a thread leading to those who had yet to be exposed. As the evidence unraveled, outrage spilled into the streets. Outside courthouses and state capitals, the air vibrated with chants and confrontation. Protesters hoisted signs demanding justice for Charlie, while counter-protesters accused the government of seizing the case as a pretext for censorship and control. Fists clashed, police sirens blared, and barricades became the fault lines of a nation tearing at itself. The federal government scrambled to contain the fury. Late-night press conferences featured stone-faced officials standing under harsh lights, urging patience. "We are conducting a full review to confirm the authenticity of the leaks," one spokesperson declared. But the words fell flat. The public no longer trusted promises. Silence and delay only amplified suspicion, and that silence began to feel deafening.
Court documents went dark. Evidence files were abruptly sealed. Telemetry feeds were cut off. For many, it looked less like careful investigation and more like a cover-up. Families were caught in the crossfire. Charlie Kirk's family issued a heartbreaking statement, reminding the world that he was more than a political figure. He was a son, a brother, a friend. They pleaded for peace, urging supporters not to avenge his death. Robinson's family, meanwhile, begged not to be targeted, insisting their son was manipulated, his mind fragile and used by darker forces. Both families became lightning rods for a storm no one could control. Experts on television compared the Robinson case to the darkest cycles of American history, the slow boil of rhetoric, the ignored warning signs, and then violence. "It feels like history repeating itself," one commentator warned. "We've seen this before, and we will see it again." Forensic psychologists sparred on air. Some insisted Robinson was simply spinning conspiracy theories to avoid accountability. Others cautioned that his calm, deliberate words suggested conviction that he truly believed he had been used. If he thought he was only the instrument, one expert said gravely, then the danger is not what he did, it's what might come next. Behind closed doors, suppression intensified. Judges approved motions to seal more evidence. Prosecutors and defense attorneys battled over what the public should be allowed to see. There was even talk of moving the trial to another state. Security swelled around the courthouse, as if preparing for siege. What had begun as a murder case was now a national crisis, in the limits of truth, trust, and the strength of institutions to calm a restless nation. And at the center of it all remained a phrase that refused to die. They used me. When the trial began, millions tuned in to live streams, watching history unfold. Prosecutors opened with blunt certainty. Robinson had premeditated the killing of Charlie Kirk. They presented surveillance footage, Robinson parking his car, walking calmly across campus with a weapon hidden in his bag. They showed the blurred aftermath, chaos, screams, blood. But the defense stunned everyone. They didn't deny Robinson had fired the shot. Instead, they argued he had been duped. Robinson, they claimed, was an instrument of others, a pawn pushed, encouraged, and guided by those who wanted Kirk silenced without staining their own hands. Every day the trial became a war of narratives. The prosecution produced encrypted chat logs, dozens of messages that seemed to prove Robinson's intent. The defense countered with cyber experts who suggested some accounts may have been fabricated or deleted, later evidence that Robinson had been manipulated, perhaps even framed. Then came the turning point. The defense called a surprise witness, a former member of one of Robinson's online communities. Nervous but resolute, the witness admitted that private conversations about targeting Kirk had taken place months before the shooting. Some comments were jokes, he explained, but others darker, sharper, hinted at insider knowledge of Kirk's movements. The courtroom froze. Jurors leaned forward. Even the judge seemed unsettled. For the jury, the line between lone wolf violence and orchestrated conspiracy had blurred beyond recognition. When the verdict finally came, it landed like a hammer. Guilty of aggravated murder. Robinson sat motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead. No tears, no outburst, just a void. The gallery erupted, gasps, sobs, murmurs swirling like storm winds. For some, it was justice. For others, it was an incomplete answer. A verdict that punished one man but left the larger mystery unresolved. Because Robinson's words lingered, echoing in every unanswered question. They hired me. The world had twisted it into another phrase. They used me, and it would not let go. Was Robinson a monster who acted alone, or was he merely a pawn in a larger, hidden game? The trial produced a verdict, but not closure. And that is where the story refuses to end.